So much like the rest of you, I watched the PlayStation Showcase the other day, dropping everything I was doing, including, editing my review. But that is why this video is a few days late, because I was working on that and, priorities and stuff. And coming out of it, I think that my sort of opinion and idea of the whole thing was very much in contrast to most people's. From what I have seen, it was more on the sort of negative side, and I felt like I was like the outlier here after the show, because I was like, I actually kind of really enjoyed it, but most people seem to be disappointed. Now, if you are one of those people that were disappointed, you have every reason to be. I totally understand why. Sony hasn't really had a proper showcase for like the last 2 years or so. Yes, we did have like the smaller state of play sprinkled throughout those 2 years, but those aren't proper showcases. They're not like the big thing. And so because we hadn't seen a lot in a long time, most of you probably expected there to be something big, to have, some really big heavy hitters here. And Sony didn't actually set that expectation themselves, to be fair. They didn't actually say anything about it. They were just like, hey, you guys are invited, and here's the show next week at this date and this time. And then the rest of us were like, well, there's going to be this thing, there's going to be that thing. And so, in a way, it kind of is our fault, but at the same time, I totally understand why most of you felt the way that you did. And I'm sure, like all the things that you saw on Twitter and all those rumors and whatever, you're probably like, yeah, it's got to be. This is the one, right? And especially because it's an hour long, and so we expect more things. And from like PlayStation themselves, if they're doing a PlayStation sort of showcase and their own specific dedicated event, you'd expect to see, more first-party titles. And yes, we got like maybe one or two, I think, but most of it was just third-party. And so on that front, I kind of agree. I was a little disappointed there too. But personally, I think I was just like in a completely like different mindset going in for some reason. Like I had really little to no expectations at all going into it. I was just like, okay, just show me what you got to show me. And I don't know, I just left overall feeling pretty good about it. I was like, damn, that was good. Now, I didn't think it was like the best showcase I've ever seen, right? It wasn't like, wow, this is mind-blowing stuff. But I was like, yeah, this was decent. I enjoyed it, yeah. I dug what we saw. And I know a lot of you didn't. And yeah, it is unfortunate that we didn't get to see a lot more. But from what we did see, it was all right. And out of a lot of those third-party ones, there was a lot of indies there. I know a lot of people were like, oh, more indies, right? And personally, I really actually liked most indies. I liked a lot of what we saw there, too. There were actually a few of them that were really cool, namely the Plucky Squire. I thought that looked really awesome. Like, did you see it? It was like this 2D thing, and it's on like those pages and whatever, and then it suddenly is 3D. When they first announced that, I think it was last year or something, I was blown away. I was like, damn, that looks actually really cool. And then we just heard nothing about it. And then, yeah, we got to see more of it. So I was really excited to see that. And then we also got to see more of Assassin's Creed Mirage. And that actually seems to be going back to its roots, which, I don't know, it seems a little hard to be true. But hey, if it actually is, I'm all for it. I'm down for that. And especially because it is, a cheaper game than most AAA titles. This is on the cheaper side. I think it's 70 or something instead of the full 80 that it normally is, or the 90 that it fully is these days. I'm talking about Canadian, by the way. And yeah, I don't know, if it does go back to its roots, I'm down. I can't wait. And then, aside from that, we also got some pretty cool stuff like Phantom Blade Zero, which I initially thought was a Souls game, so I wasn't really into it that much because I am a little fatigued from Souls likes. Nothing wrong with you liking Souls likes, by the way, if that's your thing. It's just we've seen so many of them that I'm like, another one. Kind of like those people with the indies. From what we did see, it looked really cool, and I don't think it is actually a Souls like after all. I don't know, all the animations and stuff that looked really cool, and yeah, I don't know, I'm excited to see more of that as well. And then we got Bungie as well, who showed us their new IP, Marathon. Okay, well actually it's not a new IP because that was the first thing that they did before their Halo days. But what we did get and what we did see looked pretty damn cool. I'm kind of into it. And then we also got, things like Alan Wake 2 and Dragon's Dogma 2 and Spider-Man 2. Really, really cool stuff. And yeah, even though a lot of this stuff actually was announced before, just seeing more of it was enough to put a smile on my face.
But this does put a smile on my face.
But the big moment, the big heavy hitter for me personally, which I know hold your horses, I know a lot of you are going to feel the complete opposite way about this, was actually the reveal of Snake in the Snake Eater Remake, which is a remake of the cult classic Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, but now instead of it being called Metal Gear Solid 3, it's called Metal Gear Solid Delta. And that leads me to believe, and I think most of you probably figured out, that maybe it's because they're planning on like remaking 1 and 2 afterwards. Like initially I thought, why are they starting with 3? And then when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, maybe they just want to do that one first and then they'll do 1 and 2 after, because technically in the timeline that actually is set before those two, and so maybe they want to make this timeline like a little less confusing for new fans, considering that this series is very confusing and convoluted as it is. And so yeah, I don't know, I'm just kind of excited to see Metal Gear come back in some sort of way. I know the trailer didn't really show us much, but it was an announced trailer. They're not going to show us much, and I hope that they'll show us more as time goes on. But I know a lot of you are apprehensive about this whole thing, right? You don't even want to see this at all. Why is this being done? And I get it, right? Like, there is no Metal Gear without Hideo Kojima. I kind of disagree, to an extent, because Konami, yes, I know, they're not great. They're probably amongst one of the most hated publishers in the world, and they also released Metal Gear Survive on their own, which we saw how that turned out. But again, we haven't really seen much of it. You know, I am not like 100% like on board with this, but I am a firm believer of giving things a chance, at least to some degree.
What about my uncle? Did you give him a chance? Did you?
And so, yeah, I'm perfectly happy and content doing that here. I'm just glad that we got to see Metal Gear come back in some sort of way, and that way just happens to be a remake. Now, people have actually been asking or wanting to have a remake for a long time, ever since we had, you know, that pachinko thing, and understandably so. When they saw that, they were like, oh, that looks really cool, and then now that we're finally getting it, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really want it. Are those the same people? Not necessarily, but like there are still people that do want it, and so it makes sense. And like with Konami, yeah, if they were doing a completely new entry into the series, I probably wouldn't bat an eye. I would be like, no, I'm good. I don't trust them to do that. I technically shouldn't even trust them to do this, but it is a remake after all, so I feel like it is a little harder to screw up. I think you would have to intentionally do like all the wrong things to screw it up. And so I actually kind of have a bit of faith in Konami here. I think that they could do it, and apparently all of the original voice actors are going to be in it. Now that I know that is a question of whether or not that's actually going to be them like coming back to re-record their lines, which I really hope it is, or if it is, you know, that they're just going to reuse some of those lines from the original game, which might be the case, which I'm really hoping it isn't, but again, we don't know, and we'll see. But, you know, a lot of people were also like, okay, well, who's, you know, behind the project? Who's attached to the project? Why didn't they announce it? Why didn't they say anything? And then they finally did come out and say that, yes, they are, like, I guess, developing it in-house alongside with Virtuos, who do, like, ports of games and stuff. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how we should feel about it one way or another, but I don't know. I think I'm ready to give it a chance. I'm ready to give it a shot. We will see how it goes. And there are a lot of people that are just like kind of against remakes as it is. I am a pretty big defender of remakes for video games a lot of the times. Not every case. I'm not like entirely delusional that we need every game to be remade, but I think there are a good number of remakes out there that are actually warranted. And when you compare it to what remakes are, right? Yeah, like movies, I am less inclined to agree with movie remakes, because with movies, they don't really age nearly as fast as video games do, right? Video games just get so outdated much quicker than movies ever will, because with movies, you can have like a 40-year-old movie, and as long as that is, you know, upscaled into 4K or whatever, you're good to go. You can watch that movie. There isn't really much of a barrier of entry in there, right? Whereas with here, yes, it kind of can be the same thing. You can remaster something, right? And it can be really, really good. like the Metroid Prime remaster we just got earlier this year. That is awesome, right? That was great. But it's not always just about upscaling or making the graphics look prettier than they are. It is about how it controls and what the gameplay is like. That is a huge component and a huge factor that plays into all of this, right? And to be honest, I don't think Metal Gear Solid 3 really controls very well. I do think that is kind of out on the outdated end. And I still am kind of even a supporter of games that might not be necessarily outdated and actually play perfectly fine the way they are. In fact, like Dead Space, for example, that one holds up very, very well. Yet I still preferred the remake and supported the remake when it came out because they just had changes that I just overall preferred, right? You can go and watch the review if you want to know all the details about that and why I actually really dug that. But, you know, in that case, that was one of those things where it's like, yeah, we didn't need it, but it was nice that we had it. And yeah, speaking of Dead Space, that is actually one of the things I wanted to point to as to why I'm kind of not as concerned as most people are about the Snake Eater Remake. You know, Dead Space, that was another thing that people were a little concerned about as well, because maybe not as much as Konami, but EA is another company that is very much hated. Yet they still delivered a really good product, one that, you know, is a Game of the Year contender. It's personally not my Game of the Year. We already know that it's Zelda. That's established. But it is up there. It is definitely one of the best ones that happen to release this year, alongside Resident Evil 4 Remake, right? And that is EA that we're talking about. Yeah, EA doesn't deliver a lot of times. Most of the time, actually, they don't. But on a rare occasion, they do this. And so maybe this is one of those times that they actually do it, and you're like, wow, I'm surprised. And that another thing that people were apprehensive about when it came to sort of Dead Space as a remake was that, you know, Glenn Schofield wouldn't be attached to it because he was busy doing his own thing in his own studio, developing the Callisto Protocol, which was meant to be the true spiritual successor to Dead Space. But we saw how that turned out versus how Dead Space actually turned out. And yeah, so I don't think it's always the case. I do think that you don't really need the original creator. Of course, yes, it could be better, right? And we would have more trust in it if, you know, Hideo was still attached to this project, but obviously because they fell out and they had that debacle and that whole thing, obviously that's never going to happen. But, you know, I still think that they could. And then aside from that, they also announced right after the HD collection, which will have, you know, like be split into volumes, and that one is called like Volume 1, so I assume they'll have a Volume 2 later. But in Volume 1, you know, we have the original trilogy. We have 1, 2, and 3 all in there. And so that tells me maybe in the future we'll also get in Volume 2 Metal Gear Solid 4, right? Which is currently locked on the PlayStation 3, right? There's no way to play it. And I get it. We had an HD collection before for Metal Gear, and then they completely delisted it. And yeah, we shouldn't really credit Konami for this. You know, this is kind of one strike against them. But then on the other hand, after all, we are getting it. And, you know, like, there is no other way to play these games, at least not legally. And now that we're finally getting it, even though it took a long ass time, sure, I'm just glad that we are. There is a slight silver lining here. And so my whole, I guess, idea and the thing that I've been trying to say here is that, yeah, I get there is cause for concern, but I also want to quell those concerns a little bit because I think there might be some potential here. Don't hold me accountable for this if it does actually turn out like absolute dog water. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts, and I know I am kind of the outlier, and I know a lot of your thoughts will be in contrast to mine, but yeah, I want to hear all of those thoughts and ideas, so let me know in the comments down below. But no matter what stance you have on all of this, at least we can all agree that if they don't include that ladder climbing scene, then we riot. And until next time, I'll see you soon.